Creative Mind, Exploring the Art of Thinking by Forrest Kinney. Crossing, Part 2. Suppose we want to direct a friend to the location circled here. If we only have simple binary thinking, we can't do it. If we only have the distinction of south and north, how can you get there? You can only go north or south. But once you cross that distinction with another distinction and call it west and east, then you have new ways to travel, new ways to think and communicate. Then you can tell someone to go north for a certain distance and then turn east and arrive at the desired point. Here's another way to show how crossing different distinctions allows us to think more accurately about reality. On or right around September 21st in the Northern Hemisphere, at the autumnal equinox, the days and nights are both 12 hours long. And 6 months later, at the vernal equinox, occurring on or about March 21st, the days and nights are again both 12 hours long. In between the autumnal equinox in September and the vernal equinox in March, we have nights that are longer than the days. And in between the vernal equinox in March and the autumnal equinox in September, we have days that are longer than the nights. So far we have two seasons, which we could call the season of darkness or the season of longer nights, and the season of light, which has longer days. But how do we account for the differences between the four seasons? To allow for this, we need to make another distinction. A tree looks like either this or this during the light season when the days are longer, and like this or this during the dark season when the nights are longer. As a way to account for the difference between the four seasons, we can recognize that during winter and spring, the days are getting longer each day, so it's getting lighter each day. And during autumn and summer, the days are getting shorter, so it's getting a little darker every day. By crossing, by making two sets of distinctions, we have a way of understanding the difference between the four seasons. In the medieval era, many manuscripts such as this articulated the concept of the four elements: earth, water, air, and fire. This idea is thought to date back to Aristotle, or even further back. Aristotle spoke of four basic elements that were composed of hot and cold, combined with dry and wet. Fire was the combination of hot and dry. Air was made of hot and wet. Water was wet and cold, while earth was cold and dry. The old theory of the four temperaments was based on this understanding. So why is crossing such a valuable thinking tool? And why is it so important that we are aware of it? Well, many, if not the majority, of the mental mistakes we make are because we make one binary distinction and stop there. For example, I see a sign showing the name of the highway I want to take, and I look no further. I don't pay attention to this. So I've correctly chosen to turn onto Mulholland Highway rather than Park Entrance Road. But then I need to distinguish whether I'm going to go east or west, which in this case is the right way to go. The other day I set my alarm to ring at 6 o'clock. That was the right number rather than, say, 7. But the alarm didn't go off. Why? Because I accidentally set it for 6 p.m. instead of 6 a.m. I didn't go further and make that distinction. Yes, I used the right spices, but I put in way too much pepper and way too little ginger. Yes, I said the right words, but my tone of voice was all wrong. Many of our mistakes and much of our bad thinking is because we are like a scale that only measures one thing. What weighs more is better, what weighs less is worse. But what if you had gold that weighs less than a hunk of lead? Would you really want to have more lead than gold? Here again, we need to go further in our thinking. We need to take the distinction of more and less and cross it with a distinction of lead and gold. Most people would rather have less gold than more lead. Understanding crossing can help protect us from those trying to take advantage of us. For example, there's what I call the salesman trick. Suppose you're interested in this vehicle and it comes in various colors. The salesman says, which are you going to buy, the red one or the gray one? And so he is focusing your attention on buying the gray one or buying the red one, gray or red. This distracts you from remembering that you have the option of not buying either car. Understanding the technique of crossing helps us when learning skills and arts, and also helps us keep growing as artists and creators. For a number of years, I made my living as a music educator. Again and again, the same thing would happen. A student would play some notes and say, okay, that's it. The student would use simple binary thinking and say, I'm playing the right notes rather than the wrong notes. So I would say, really, are you sure? And then the student would get caught in binary thinking and say, well, let's see, yes, I'm playing these notes correctly. The student does not look any further. So then I would say, did you notice that some notes are black and others are white? What does that mean? The student would say, I forgot about the different rhythms. So what is needed is to consider not just whether we are playing the pitches right or wrong, but also the rhythms. And so the goal is to get both the pitches and rhythms right, rather than just the pitches right and the rhythm wrong. Then the student will say, okay, now I'm done. And I'll say, what about that P written there? What does that mean? To play softly. And so the student is now to play the right pitches and rhythms, but also at the right volume, or what is called dynamics. And then I point to the word adagio, and the student realizes they need to play what they were just playing, but slower. And then I point out the pedal marking. So the student needs to add the pedal to everything they have just done. And so, in a sense, learning is a process of mastering one thing and then crossing it with another and another, constantly refining. If we don't do this, it's like building a shed and stopping at the framing of it and considering the building complete. And so we end up getting the pitches right and the rhythm right, but we never really get to the music. There was a dance pioneer named Rudolf Laban who invented a way of analyzing movements that is based on the technique of crossing. He found that movements can be called light or heavy, and quick and sustained. So movements that are quick and heavy would be like pounding. Movements that are heavy but sustained would be like sanding. Movements that are light and sustained would be like stroking a dog's head. And movements that are quick and light would be like tapping. Each of these movements can be crossed again to make 8 different movements. Any of them can be direct and focused, like the movement used in punching something, or indirect, as in floating. Then, these movements can be further crossed by whether they flow freely, like gliding, or move in a bound way, like pressing. This sort of thinking about and analyzing movement is so much more attuned to the intricacies of reality than simple binary thinking, and it helps us develop artistry of movement as well as thinking. This idea applies to the learning of any complex skill. When I learned to play golf, for example, I had to first learn how to grip the club, and then, while keeping that grip through the swing, learn to not lift my head, and so on. Learning is a process of crossing, of adding one new thing on top of another. I'd like to now talk about a specific use of the crossing technique I call unassuming. Here's how it works. Suppose a husband comes home with a new vacuum cleaner and says he bought a powerful one so he can really get the job done. The wife said it's way too loud and she wants one that is soft. But the man says that soft ones are going to have weaker motors. So the man is assuming that loud and powerful always go together, and that the opposites, weak and soft, also go together. And so now let's do the specific crossing technique I call unassuming. This is when you split those pairs apart. Now we see that the pairing of loud and powerful is one option, and the pairing of weak and soft is another. But there can also be the possibility of a vacuum that is loud and weak, and also one that is soft and powerful. The wife encourages her husband to explore this last option. And so he searches for a vacuum that is soft and powerful, he finds one, and domestic harmony is restored. Another example. Many of us have learned the attitude that play is fun and work is, well, it's unfun. So let's split that assumption apart. We now see that play can be unfun, such as when we go to a party when we'd rather stay home, or that our work can be our greatest source of enjoyment. I grew up in a time when for a boy or a man, to be strong was to be something like a soldier, to act without showing feelings or emotions. To show one's feelings and emotions was a sign of weakness. But by doing the practice of unassuming, we find that it is also possible to consider that a strong man is one who can endure powerful feelings and even be nurturing, and that a person who represses their feelings and humanity might not be strong, but weak. Advertisers are always making associations in our minds. There was a successful ad campaign years ago based on the idea that blondes have more fun, so you should color your hair. The advertisers brought together blonde and fun, suggesting that dark was less fun. When we do the unassuming practice, we find not only what the advertisers want us to believe, but maybe that it's more fun to be who we are and less fun to pretend to be somebody else. There are countless other ways to use the technique of crossing. This video only begins to suggest the possibilities. I hope you enjoy exploring them.